Okay, so episode 2 dropped a bit of a bombshell on us, right? In this review video, we're going to have to talk about the evolving nature of our chase here in the Loki series, and we're also going to hit upon the running conversation that we're having about free will. So, strap in, and let's go ahead and talk about Loki episode 2. Spoiler alert. Don't say I didn't warn you. Now, at the end of the first episode, we learned that the variant that we were chasing was, well, Loki himself. And then by the end of the second episode here, we actually learned that we're chasing Loki. Kind of. The same, but different. Yeah, that might be the best way. No. The same, but the same. Now, as I've said before, there are people out there who have a much deeper connection with this material in terms of all of the characters and whatnot than I did. I'm just kind of your typical kid who grew up reading the comics and, having kind of a surface level knowledge, deeper in some areas than other. So I don't have a hugely profound bit of knowledge on Lady Loki. I do understand, however, that it is essentially, well, depending on which kind of version you're talking about here, it is Loki. I do think that they're going with that instead of the idea of there was a time when Loki possessed a female body. This, however, I think they're probably going with the idea that this is Loki, right? So he is still essentially chasing himself. However, it's still different for me, and it has nothing to do with the fact that Loki is in a female form. It has to do with the fact of the way that the character has been portrayed so far. At about the 28-minute mark of the episode, Loki and Mobius have a really fascinating discussion about free will, which we'll get to a little bit later in this review video. But in that discussion, Loki talks about kind of the urge or the need to have a bit of chaos in life, right? To be able to mix things up a little bit so that you're never just focused on the idea that things are already written, everything is done already, and there's nothing new that can be spontaneously created in the universe, or at least on the sacred timeline universe. So it would seem to me that Lady Loki is here to throw a bit of chaos into the sacred nature of that timeline, to disturb it. And this connects a bit with what I talked about in my first review episode for this series, which is the mere creation or presence of a sacred timeline. A unique timeline that has to be protected invites villains to want to disturb it, to want to destroy it. And so that's what we're seeing right here. I thought it was a really, really smartly done moment when Loki figures out that the variant can hide in apocalyptic events on the timeline. And every time that apocalypse occurs, it wipes away everything that happened prior to it. So there is no, let's say, fingerprint of the variant anywhere for them to track. So, for example, they use Pompeii and the eruption of the volcano. And Loki figures out that if you are in that timeline just before the apocalyptic event, you can do essentially whatever you want and nobody will know because it all gets erased. I found that to be so incredibly well done and well thought through. I think, in my opinion, it's probably the best writing that we've seen thus far in any of the MCU series. Just that one moment, which probably will never show up again. But I just thought it was really well done and well thought out. Now, that little bit of genius moment in the writing helps to establish something that they talk about at the beginning of the episode, which is that all of these Lokis, these variant Lokis, are quite different from each other. And actually, they have unique properties. It's not just that they look different from each other or that they have varying levels of intellect or powers, even for that matter, right? Loki has that great moment where he talks to us about the difference between like projecting and versus taking on, becoming the illusion of something, which of course that sets up probably the idea of Lady Loki as well later on for us. Maybe in the third episode, they'll get more into that. But it also, that bit of writing about the hiding in the apocalypse thing also helps to establish that they want to go a different route with this Loki hunting Loki thing than maybe they originally projected, although I probably maybe read too much into it. That could be the case. What I mean is we've got a more traditional, I think, hunt going on here. It's more traditional in the sense that you have one person needing to hunt another, and that other person is a very dangerous entity kind of thing. It's different from the idea that Loki was hunting himself. And I know that some people are going to say, no. Again, Lady Loki is Loki. Okay, but the old literary snob in me is going to say, no, it's not the same thing, really. As opposed to if you had a perfect copy of Loki, let's say, right, or perfect enough, and Loki were truly hunting himself, to me, that's a very different idea than what they're showing here. And yeah, I was actually pretty excited about the idea of Loki really hunting himself or trying to capture himself. To me, in the brief exchange that Lady Loki has with our Loki, you see enough of a difference that it certainly doesn't feel like Loki is hunting himself anymore. Now, this isn't to say that you still couldn't achieve a sense of Loki, our Loki, trying to find and defeat himself. Of course, you can still have that, like, a million other stories do. But you do lose, for me, a bit of that rich element of the idea of that Loki was going to hunt down his own shadow, defeat it, and then become something greater than he already was, because the episode or the series had established that Loki is not happy with who he is. He doesn't really want to be that shadow version of himself. And so the way it was set up was that Loki was going to overcome his self, his shadow self, in quite a very tangible way, which was fascinating to me. So I guess all of that to say, I am still interested in the chase, but a little bit slightly less interested that it's not really himself, in a sense. I don't know, maybe I'm alone in that. Let me know in the comments below if I'm just kind of rambling, or do you accept what I'm trying to say, that even though it could be cosmologically himself, Loki, maybe narrative-wise, it's not the same Loki. And so it changes that idea of the hunt that they put forward in that first episode. All right, so let's get into our running discussion here of free will and how it's used in the Loki series. At about the 28-minute mark of the episode, Loki and Mobius have a great conversation about free will and chaos and whatnot, and how we interact with the idea of everything being predetermined behind us and then writing what's in front of us. Mobius at one point says, and let me just read it so that I get it right, "Existence is chaos. Nothing makes sense, so we try to make sense of it." He then says, "I'm lucky that the chaos I emerged into gave me all of this, my own glorious purpose." The reason why this conversation is so interesting to me is because on the surface, Mobius seems like he's purely a determinist, right? That everything, there is no free will because every idea, action, or thought has a predetermined cause that led you to that action, idea, or thought. But I'm not sure that he actually is. In some sense, his job almost forces him into being, at the very least, a kind of compatibilist. And the compatibilist believes that, yes, if you have an origin point of history, let's say the Big Bang, right? Then you will have predetermined causes all the way moving forward. But compatibilists believe in both, or they believe that both can exist. the idea of free will and predetermined causes. And the way that they do that is they believe that if you can alter that initial point of history, right? So if the Big Bang changes just slightly, all of the predetermined events going into the future then also are changed somewhat. And therefore, the future is not hard written if that origin point can change a little bit. And so, in some sense, Mobius has to be at the very least a kind of compatibilist, because otherwise you would just end up accepting that you have these variants who are messing with the sacred timeline because it was written for them to do that. Do you see what I'm saying with this? And that was my worry a little bit about this series from the beginning, is that you have to be careful about how sticky this can really become in terms of the logic. Most people are going to give them a tremendous amount of leeway, right? But you'll have some people who will just not be able to accept any sort of inconsistencies in logic here. And that takes us also to the second part of this conversation that I thought was really interesting, and that is Loki and despair. Now, Loki's response to all of this is really interesting. He asks Mobius, how does it all end? And Mobius kind of shuffles in his place a little bit and huffs and puffs, and he says, it's a work in progress, in that very Owen Wilson way, which I love Owen Wilson in this. I love Owen Wilson in general, but I love him in this role especially. And here's the line that you might have missed because it's couched as a joke. Loki says, "Oh, those lazy timekeepers, what are they waiting for?" Now that last line might seem like a throwaway one, but it really isn't. What Loki expresses in that "what are they waiting for" line is probably what most people would eventually succumb to, which is really a kind of despair, right? So in other words, if everything is already written past, present, future, it creates a kind of despair in what exactly am I responsible for here, right? I become a kind of NPC, if you will, in a video game with no hero. We're all just kind of walking around the village doing what exactly? For what purpose? And so Loki, in a very dark way, is sort of saying, if this is all already written, what's the point in waiting for it? Just get to the end already. Whoa. Some pretty dark stuff there, Mr. Loki. Now, as I said in my previous review video, the writers here for the series are going to have to deal with this issue of the deterministic slide toward despair. And I'm curious to see what they do with it, because on a purely species level, I'm not sure you can avoid that slide toward despair. I'm not sure that you can. I know that there are some optimistic determinists, let's call them, people like Sam Harris, who talks about how a purely deterministic outlook would help build more empathy into humanity. And they make a good case. He makes a pretty good argument there for that. But on a large scale species level of humanity, I'm not sure you can avoid that slide into despair. We tend to be a species who needs agency, or needs to believe that we have agency at the very least. So I'm curious to see what Marvel does here. I will share with you one thing though. The only way that I know how to get out of that feeling, that void of deterministic despair, good cannoli. That's it. It's the only way I know how, at least. I'm not talking about that soggy shell crap that you get sometimes at bad supermarkets. It's got to be a good, crisp, clean cannoli, no chocolate chips, just good cream. That'll make you believe in free will right there. So I'm still really into this series. I'm all in. I think it's fantastic. And I want to give extra props to the writers here who are dealing with really complex, difficult, concepts here. So a lot of credit goes to those writers. They're doing a great job. Tom Hiddleston, Owen Wilson, they're also doing fantastic. It's really entertaining, the chemistry between the two of them. Let me know in the comments below. Am I the only one who's just slightly disappointed that it's not really Loki hunting himself per se? And again, I talked a bit about why it's not really him, even though it's supposed to be. Or you can let me know about the free will discussion. What do you think about that? Do you think they're handling that free will discussion well? Let me know in the comments below what you think. I'm fascinated in it. So until next time, have a great week. And consider subscribing. Although it's already been predetermined if you will subscribe to the channel or not. So you might as well do it. Yeah, I think my logic works there.